My name is Maddie Cole. I'm 27 years old, and I just completed medical school finally. Even saying those words out loud feels foreign, like they belong to someone else. Maybe because for most of my life, I was told directly and indirectly that I wouldn't make it. Not by professors, not by classmates, but by the people who were supposed to believe in me first, my family. Growing up as the middle child in a suburban Massachusetts household, invisibility became second nature. My older sister Lauren was the golden standard, married at 24, 2 kids by 28, running a real estate company she inherited from our uncle. My younger brother Ethan was the surprise baby everyone adored. He couldn't sneeze without someone applauding him. Meanwhile, I drowned quietly in textbooks and night shifts. Not because I loved suffering, but because somewhere deep inside, I believed there was more for me. I just needed to prove it, not for applause, just to be seen. My mom, Carol, never understood my drive. She'd sigh dramatically when I talked about medicine, then drop passive-aggressive lines like, "Why would a woman want to spend her best years in a hospital?" she once told me. "Doctors are miserable. Honey, don't sacrifice your life for status." But it was never about status. It was about purpose. Even so, I stopped seeking her approval by the time I hit 16. Still, a part of me, perhaps the most childlike sliver of my soul, hoped that when I walked across the graduation stage, my white coat glowing under the lights, she'd be in the crowd, maybe even proud. That small hope unraveled a week before the ceremony. I was between rotations when she called me. Her voice was sugar-coated, as it always was before she dropped a verbal bomb. "Maddie, we won't be able to make it. Sweetheart, your dad and I, well, we're going on a cruise. It's been booked for months." My hand froze mid-sandwich. A cruise, I asked. Not even mad, just stunned. "You're skipping my graduation for a cruise." There was a pause, and then that light laugh. "Don't be dramatic. You surprised us. Honestly, we weren't sure you'd go through with all this." That sentence didn't sting, it hollowed me, because deep down, I suspected it was true. I didn't scream or argue. I just said, "Then don't bother showing up for the reception either." She didn't even ask what reception, just mumbled something about sunscreen and hung up. The day of graduation came like a thunderstorm, loud, beautiful, and gone too quickly. I smiled for every photo, hugged my classmates, accepted flowers from Javier's parents, who whispered, "We're so proud of you, sweet girl," as if trying to patch a wound they didn't know the depth of. But that ache in my chest stayed, an ache only caused by being invisible to the people who should have celebrated me first. I thought that was the end of it, another tally on a long list of family no-shows. But then, 3 days later, I woke up to a text from Lauren. No words, just a photo, half asleep. I opened it and nearly dropped my phone. There, towering over a Boston freeway, was a billboard, my face, my white coat, my name. The hospital I volunteered with had chosen me as part of a citywide campaign, The Future of Healing. Under my image, Dr. Madeline Cole, Local Hope, Global Heart. For a moment, I stopped breathing. The second message came moments later, from Lauren again. "Looks like Mom and Dad missed more than a cruise." I didn't know what to feel: pride, bitterness, sad satisfaction. Maybe all three. But the real twist came hours later, when my phone started blowing up with missed calls from my mom, my dad, even Ethan. I didn't answer any of them. That night, curiosity betrayed me. I listened to one voicemail. Just one. It was my mother. Her voice didn't carry its usual breezy tone. It was thin, uneasy. "Maddie, we saw the billboard. Your uncle sent a photo too. Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you say anything? Please, call us." I didn't. Instead, I stared at my diploma framed above my desk. and every neglected holiday and ignored milestone came flooding back like a tidal wave. The Thanksgiving. I stayed on campus because Lauren's family vacation couldn't accommodate me. The Christmas they left without a goodbye because Ethan wanted to snowboard. The birthdays they skipped because of scheduling conflicts. I remembered my mother's eye roll every time I said I had an exam during a family brunch, and I realized I'd built a whole life on being their afterthought. A week passed before someone knocked on my apartment door. It was Ethan, standing awkwardly, holding a Ziploc bag of cookies. "Mom sent these," he muttered. "She thought you might want to talk." I let him in. We sat in silence until he finally broke it. "She's freaking out, like crying and everything, said she didn't think it'd be a big deal." I almost laughed. Didn't know what would be a big deal that I became a doctor, or that she missed the only moment that ever mattered. He didn't answer. Instead, he showed me a photo, one I hadn't seen. It was my mother, standing in front of the billboard, sunglasses on, but clearly crying. She stood there for over an hour. Ethan said quietly. I didn't reply, not because I didn't feel something, but because I didn't know what to call it. Was it grief, rage, closure? It was all tangled. And then came the real test, an invitation to an elite gala honoring top graduates in Boston's medical community. I could bring 3 guests. 3. I looked at the RSVP form and left my parents' names blank. I didn't reply to my mother's message about the gala. I reread it every night, though. "We heard about the ceremony next month. Your cousin Tara mentioned it. Is there a way we can attend? We'd love to support you this time." The words felt like a trick mirror, reflecting just enough regret to sound sincere, but not enough to make me forget the years of silence. Support me this time, as if all the other times were dry runs, rehearsals for the one that finally made me visible. I didn't answer, not out of cruelty, but because I didn't trust myself not to say what I really felt. And maybe that scared me more than their absence ever had. The part of me that still wanted them there was the part I hated most. The part I'd spent years trying to bury beneath thick layers of independence and exhaustion. But their message cracked through. 3 days passed in quiet. Then, Lauren called. That in itself was a surprise. Lauren rarely called, unless it was to borrow something or ask for a last-minute babysitting favor. I picked up without thinking. "You're really not inviting them," she said flatly. "No greeting. No, 'Hey, boo, how are you?' Just a loaded question." "Nice to hear from you, too," I replied, already bracing for whatever came next. She exhaled loudly, like I was the one making things difficult. "Mom is spiraling. She's talking about flying in early, waiting outside the venue. She's been calling relatives asking to use their +1s just to sneak in. Maddie, she's losing it." I leaned against the wall, phone pressed to my cheek, suddenly very tired. So what? She wants to show up uninvited to prove she cares now. After skipping my actual graduation, after mocking me for even trying, Lauren didn't answer immediately. I'm not saying she's right. I'm saying, are you really okay watching her humiliate herself like that? I closed my eyes, the anger buzzing in my jaw. Maybe she should feel humiliated. Maybe she should sit with that. After we hung up, I couldn't stop pacing. The idea of my mother standing outside the grand hall in heels, sweating in July heat. Desperate to be seen, it didn't bring me joy. It brought a strange ache I couldn't name. All my life, I'd kept quiet to avoid making her uncomfortable, let her take credit for accomplishments she dismissed, stayed silent at dinners while she bragged about Lauren's business deals and Ethan's brilliant ideas for a podcast. But now, after the billboard, after hearing her say, "We didn't think you'd actually make it," I was done being her buffer. That night, I invited 3 people. None of them shared my blood. I invited Dr. Patel, my attending physician during rotations. She was the first person to call me doctor without hesitation. I invited Javier's mother, Maria, who once packed me a week's worth of homemade lunches during finals. And I invited Mr. Thompson, a terminal cancer patient I had volunteered with, who once told me, "You'll go far, kid, even if your family doesn't see it yet." That was my list, and for the first time, it felt complete. But the story didn't stop there. It never does. Does it? A week before the event, my father showed up at my door. No call, no warning, just a soft knock and a bouquet of half-wilted supermarket flowers. I opened the door, and he looked small, smaller than I remembered. "Can we talk?" he asked. I didn't respond, just stepped aside. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table, the silence between us louder than any argument we'd ever had. "I didn't come to fight," he said. "I came to say I'm sorry." I looked up, surprised. "Your mother and we didn't know how to support you. You were always different, quiet, so determined. Instead of learning how to meet you where you were, we just assumed you didn't need us. And that was wrong." His voice was steady but weighted, like every word cost something. I didn't speak, just stared at the limp flowers between us, petals slowly curling inward. "You have every right to be hurt," he added. "But I'm asking you, not as your father, but as someone who failed. Please, let us come to the ceremony." I wanted to say yes. Some part of me, a soft, frayed part, ached to say yes, but I couldn't. Not yet. "I'm not angry," I finally said. "I'm just exhausted, tired of pretending nothing happened." He nodded, like he'd been expecting that. "Then we'll wait outside," he said. Standing slowly, he left the flowers on the table and walked out without asking for anything more. I didn't stop him. I didn't slam the door. I just stood there, watching the space he left behind. That night, I received another message. This time, it was from an unknown number. "Look what I saw today. You're amazing." Attached was a selfie someone had taken in front of the billboard, me in my white coat. Larger than life. That billboard was going viral now. My story had been picked up by local news. People were commenting online, sharing posts. Some called it inspirational. Some tagged it "Har overlooked" to overachiever. Suddenly, I was being asked to speak at community centers, at student workshops. People were seeing me, but more importantly, they were believing in me. And in that flood of attention, something shifted. My family went quiet again. No more texts, no more calls. It was like they had dipped their toes into the waters of my success. And when it wasn't warm enough, when the spotlight didn't include them, they retreated. Until the night before the gala. That's when I got one final message. From my mom, just 5 words. "We're outside. We're so sorry." I stared at my phone, the glow of the screen casting shadows on the wall. The silence in my apartment was thick, the kind that hums in your bones. And that's when the decision came, not from spite, but from clarity. Because this time, for the first time, I wasn't walking into a room hoping to be seen. I was walking in because I had earned my place. And maybe, just maybe, being seen wasn't about who was watching. Maybe it was about who you had to become when no one was looking. The morning of the gala arrived like any other, quiet and unassuming, as if the universe hadn't gotten the memo that this day would mark the end of something. I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting the suit I had bought with my first hospital paycheck. It wasn't extravagant navy blue, tailored just right, but it carried a kind of weight, like armor that had taken years to earn. My hair was pinned up with precision. My name badge gleamed under the soft lights. And yet, I felt like a stranger watching herself dress for someone else's moment. In my hand, the formal program listed each honoree by name and accolade. a glossy paper soaked in ambition and perseverance. But all I could think about was the final message I had received the night before. "We're outside. We don't have tickets. We just want to see you walk in. We're sorry. Maddie." I hadn't replied. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't know how to say it, in a way that wouldn't reopen something I'd spent years stitching closed. Downstairs, the lobby of the venue buzzed with soft music and elegant voices. I waited in the side hallway, hidden behind double doors that separated us, the honorees, from the audience. Every now and then, someone peeked in to check on us, clipboards in hand, heels clicking on polished floors. I could hear laughter from the other side, the gentle clink of champagne glasses, the rustle of evening gowns and pressed suits. But in my corner of the corridor, everything felt suspended. I checked the monitor near the green room, a small screen showing the entrance and lobby in real time. And there they were, my parents, my mother in a lavender dress I'd never seen before, clutching her purse like it held the last thread of her pride. My father stood beside her, hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels, glancing around as if searching for a familiar face or forgiveness. Neither of them spoke. They didn't try to come in. They just waited. And something about that image cracked something open inside me, not a wound, but a space, a quiet clearing where all my anger, all my grief, could breathe. I didn't feel triumphant watching them stand out there. I felt still, like this wasn't their punishment. It was simply the consequence of choices they'd made long before this night. I turned from the monitor just as the event coordinator entered. "Dr. Maddie Rivera," she said, clipboard in hand. "They're ready for you." I nodded, straightened my jacket, and walked slowly down the hallway toward the staging entrance. The host's voice echoed through the speakers, announcing the achievements of the honorees one by one. My name was called last. Dr. Madeline Rivera, recipient of the Community Health Leadership Award, recognized for her medical outreach, policy advocacy, and top national placement in emergency medicine. Applause rose gently at first, then gathered strength as I stepped toward the doors, heart pounding not with nerves, but with clarity. I moved through the entryway and across the lobby, my gaze unintentionally drifting toward the glass. And there they were. My mother spotted me first. She raised one hand in a tentative wave, eyes wide and rimmed with something wet. I stopped, just for a beat. My father stepped beside her, but didn't wave. He just looked at me, like he was finally beginning to understand who I was, who I had always been. I didn't wave back. I didn't nod or smile, but I didn't look away either. We locked eyes through the glass pane, a fragile barrier more symbolic than real. My mother mouthed something, 3 small words I'd wanted for so long. They almost didn't register. "I'm sorry." My throat tightened, not with emotion, but with restraint. And then I walked on. The stage lights warmed my face as I took my place among the other honorees. The applause dimmed, the spotlight shifted, and I stood still, feeling the weight of that moment settle over my shoulders, not like a burden, but like a crown forged in fire. And yet, just as the ceremony continued, a subtle commotion rippled through the back of the room. A door opened, a whisper, the unmistakable sound of someone entering who wasn't supposed to. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I knew the rhythm of those heels, knew them from department store Saturdays and school nights when I waited for her to come home. My mother, she was in the room now. I could feel it like a shift in gravity. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her standing at the back, uncertain, out of place, but unwilling to leave. And then, slowly, she walked forward. No one stopped her. An usher approached, whispered something, but she kept moving. Not toward the stage, not with arrogance, but with something softer. She reached the midpoint of the aisle and paused. Then, as if realizing that coming closer would unravel the dignity she had left, she sat down in an empty chair, just sat there, quietly, eyes fixed on me, a silent declaration I missed your beginning. But I'm here now. The host wrapped up introductions. And, as the room applauded again, I bowed with the others. When I looked out into the audience, she was still sitting there. My father had joined her, still and unreadable, but present, and in that frozen second, something unexpected loosened in my chest. Not forgiveness, but recognition. This wasn't their redemption arc. This was mine. After the ceremony, I stepped into the garden where the reception was held. Soft string lights glowed above tables dressed in white. Jazz played somewhere near the fountain. Strangers came up to congratulate me. Donors, professors, former patients. One woman said her daughter wanted to be like me. Another asked if I would speak at her son's school. I smiled. I answered every question. But my eyes kept drifting toward the far edge of the garden, where my parents stood near the koi pond, out of place and unsure. They didn't approach anyone. They didn't move. Just stood there like guests who had wandered into the wrong celebration. For a moment, I wanted to let them stay there. Wanted them to feel what it was like to be excluded. But that part of me, the vindictive child, was quieter now. What rose instead was exhaustion. Not from anger, but from carrying it for so long. I took a breath, crossed the garden, and stopped a few feet away. They didn't see me at first. My mom was fidgeting with her purse strap. My dad stared into the pond like the fish might have advice. I cleared my throat. "You weren't on the guest list," I said. They both turned. My mom looked at me like she wanted to cry, but didn't dare. My dad looked like he hadn't slept. "I know," she whispered. "We couldn't not come." I nodded slowly. "You didn't come to my graduation." She winced. "I know. I'll regret that forever." I looked at her, then at my father. "And you didn't think I'd make it." His voice was rough. "We were wrong. We didn't know how to raise someone like you. So, we made you small. Because it made our failure easier to carry." He looked away. "We failed you." The words hung there between us. I didn't reply right away. Just let the silence linger. Then, finally, I said, "I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it for me." My mother nodded, barely breathing. "We know." But the hardest question was still coming. "Will we hear from you?" she asked. Voice cracking, I paused, looked past them, at the lights and the laughter and the life I had built on my own. "I don't know yet," I said, and for once, that was enough. It had been 3 weeks since the gala, but the weight of that night still hung in the air like a scent that refused to fade. Every morning I'd wake up and catch myself expecting a text, a voicemail, some form of follow-up from my parents, but none came. And strangely, I didn't feel abandoned, not anymore. What I felt was something more complicated, a bittersweet freedom that came from finally acknowledging the distance between us, a distance they had carved over years of indifference, and that I had, at last, decided not to cross just to make them comfortable. At the hospital, life resumed with its usual rhythm, chaotic, relentless, alive. Residency was grueling, but I found comfort in its structure, in the purpose it demanded. My attending, Dr. Patel, noticed the shift in me almost immediately. "You've stopped holding your breath," she remarked one night after a 12-hour shift, as we sat outside the ER sharing a vending machine dinner. I didn't deny it. She was right. for the first time in my life. I wasn't waiting for applause from an empty audience. But with that clarity came another kind of ache, the one that sneaks in when silence stretches too long between people who share blood. Then, one Thursday afternoon, a letter arrived at my apartment. Not a bill, not an invitation, just a simple white envelope with no return address. But I knew the handwriting. It was my father's. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded with care, like he still believed presentation could soften content. The letter wasn't long, just a quiet recounting of a story I had forgotten the night I came home from 5th grade in tears because a classmate had said I'd never be good enough to become a doctor. He wrote that he remembered how I locked myself in my room and didn't come out until the next morning, and how he had stood outside my door with hot cocoa and said nothing because he didn't know what to say. I should have said something. The letter ended, even if it wasn't perfect, even if it wasn't enough. I see that now. I held the letter for a long time, not reading it again, just feeling its presence in my hands, like it was proof that they existed in a world I had almost written them out of. But apology isn't always a key. Sometimes, it's just an echo of a door that closed long ago. And yet, even echoes deserve to be heard. The next shift was brutal. 2 codes in the trauma bay. 1 unresponsive overdose, and a screaming teenager with a shattered femur. I barely had time to breathe between patients, let alone think. But just before midnight, I stepped outside for 5 minutes of fresh air and found a voicemail on my phone. It was my mom. "Hi, sweetheart. I know we're not in your life right now the way we should be, but we're here. Okay, we're still here. And I hope one day that means something again." I didn't cry. I didn't save the message, but I didn't delete it right away either. 2 days later, Javier stopped by my place with a bag of groceries and a look I recognized, something between concern and curiosity. "You okay?" he asked, dropping the bag on the counter. I nodded, then shook my head. "I'm fine," I said, the lie obvious even to me. He didn't push, just started unpacking the groceries like it was his kitchen. Like we'd done this 100 times. And maybe that was the point. Some people just show up without needing an invitation, without needing to fix anything. They just stay. After dinner, I finally told him about the letter, about the voicemail, about how I didn't know if I was supposed to be moved or angry or both. He looked at me for a long time and then said, "You know, it's okay if you never fully forgive them. It's also okay if you do. There's no prize either way, just peace. And you get to define what that looks like." His words settled over me like a blanket I hadn't realized I needed. And yet, peace remained elusive. It wasn't that I hadn't made progress. I had. But some nights, I still found myself scrolling through old photos, family vacations I wasn't in, birthdays I'd spent alone in a dorm, blurry snapshots of my siblings with cake and confetti, and parents who remembered to show up. I wasn't jealous anymore, but there was a kind of mourning that lingered, like something precious had been lost in transit, and I hadn't even realized it was mine to claim. Then came the unexpected. A hospital board member invited me to speak at a local high school an outreach event to inspire future first-generation college students. I almost said no. Public speaking wasn't my comfort zone, and the idea of standing in front of teenagers and trying to sound wise felt absurd. But Dr. Patel encouraged me. "You have a story," she said, "and stories change things." So I went. I stood in the gymnasium under harsh lights, facing rows of restless faces, and told them the truth about struggle, about loneliness, about climbing a mountain only to realize the people at the top weren't the ones you thought would be waiting. And something happened as I spoke. The room got quiet, not bored quiet, but breath-held quiet, like they were seeing themselves in my story, like they understood. Afterward, a girl approached me, 17 maybe, hair in a messy bun, oversized hoodie. She didn't say much, just handed me a note. I opened it later that night. It said, "Thank you. Now I believe I can try." Just 6 words, but they hit harder than any award ever had. That same week, I got another letter, this time from my mother. Her handwriting shakier, more hesitant. She didn't tell a story. She didn't make excuses. She simply wrote, "If there's a future version of us where we sit in the same room without hurt, I'll wait as long as it takes. I'll wait even if I'm not invited in." And for the first time, I cried, not for the past, but for the possibility of something else. A few nights later, I found myself at the old pier, the one I used to go to during med school when the noise in my head got too loud. The waves lapped rhythmically below, the air sharp with salt and silence. I stood there watching the city lights blink across the water and thought maybe this is what healing feels like. Not the triumphant swell of resolution, but the quiet hum of choosing not to carry bitterness anymore. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to my mother's message, and typed a single reply. "Thank you. No promises, no invitations, just acknowledgement, because sometimes the smallest step forward feels like a leap." As I turned to leave the pier, the wind brushing strands of hair from my face, I felt something shift, not in the world, but in me. I was no longer the girl waiting at the kitchen table for her family to show up. I was the woman walking away from the ocean, toward a future she was finally ready to claim. And, in that final breath of night, I understood something simple but true. Healing doesn't ask for perfection. It only asks for honesty. And tonight, I had given it just enough to begin again. 6 months had passed. The season had turned. The air in Seattle carried that faint, steady drizzle only the locals found comforting. I'd settled into my new role as a community medicine fellow, far from the city I'd once called home, further still from the people I'd once tried so hard to impress. Yet, even here, surrounded by new colleagues, fresh starts, and a view of the Puget Sound from my clinic's break room window, there were moments when the past surfaced like an old bruise beneath the skin. My apartment was quiet, lived in, and mostly untouched by visitors. I liked it that way. The silence didn't bother me anymore. It made space for the version of myself I was still learning to embrace, one not shaped by expectation, guilt, or the ache of approval never received. I filled the space with books and succulents and small comforts, a coffee grinder I'd saved for, a soft wool throw I found on sale, jazz humming through a Bluetooth speaker late at night when the world felt far away. One Friday evening, I came home to a package on my doorstep, no return label, inside a thick leather-bound journal and a card. Just a few words, in my father's unmistakable handwriting. "If you ever feel like telling your story, this is for you. We'd like to read it, whenever you're ready." I ran my hand over the soft grain of the cover, felt the edges of pages that hadn't yet been touched, and set it on my shelf, not to forget, but to decide, in my own time, if and when I'd write. At the clinic, I was beginning to understand what it meant to be the person others turned to, not because they had no one else, but because they trusted me. Patients came back, week after week, not just for prescriptions or lab results, but for something quieter, a listening ear, a kind word, a reminder that they weren't alone. Somewhere along the line, I'd become the steady presence I'd always needed, not for myself, but for others, and that felt more powerful than anything I'd imagined. Javier visited that spring. He'd moved to D.C. for a policy fellowship, but insisted on flying across the country just to check in. We sat on my tiny balcony, 2 lawn chairs, and a bottle of cheap Merlot between us. "You seem different," he said. Not unkindly, like you're not carrying the same weight. I shrugged, smiling into the breeze. Maybe I finally learned how to set it down. We talked long into the night. About childhood, ambition, heartbreak, and family, the kind we're born into and the kind we choose. I told him about the journal. He didn't press me to open it. He just said, "When you do write it, it'll help someone else. Maybe even them." I didn't know if I believed that, but I appreciated that he did. Then, one rainy morning, an email arrived. Subject line, "Request for speaker." A national nonprofit had seen the clip of my high school talk, the one someone uploaded without me knowing. They wanted me to deliver a keynote at their annual conference on resilience, identity, and healing from invisible wounds. I stared at the screen for a long time, then read it again and again. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl who once stood invisible in her own living room was now being asked to speak to hundreds. I said yes. The conference hall in Chicago buzzed with energy. As I walked on stage, lights blinding and applause rising, I didn't think about whether my parents were watching. I thought about the girl in the hoodie who handed me the note. I thought about the kid at the pier who learned to breathe again. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to be seen and how, now, I simply was on my own terms. After the talk, a woman in her 60s approached me in the green room. She held my hands in hers and whispered, "I was a mother like yours once. Thank you for helping me see what I missed." Her voice cracked. Mine did too. We didn't exchange names. We didn't need to. Some wounds live in silence, but some healing begins there too. Later that month, I received an invitation, not to a party, not to a wedding, but to dinner, from Ela. No pressure. Her text said, "Just us and the kids. They'd love to meet their aunt properly." I stared at the message, thumb hovering. Isla had changed, or at least, she'd tried. She sent photos of her kids now and then, little stories about their science projects, or tantrums, or piano recitals. There was a softening in her tone I hadn't heard before, a desire, perhaps, not to rewrite the past, but to stop pretending it hadn't happened. I accepted. We met at a small Italian restaurant near her home, the kind with red checkered tablecloths and too loud music. Her son was shy, her daughter boisterous. They called me Dr. Auntie, which made me laugh more than I expected. Ela watched me, cautious but open, like someone balancing apology and hope. "You were always the brave one," she said at one point. I almost corrected her, but didn't. Maybe bravery is just what you do when you're tired of being broken. When I got home that night, I found myself reaching for the journal. I opened to the first page and wrote a single sentence. "This is not a story of revenge. It's a story of becoming." Then I closed it again. Not because I was finished, but because I finally knew how to begin. And as I stood by my window, rain tapping softly on the glass, I realized something else. The past hadn't vanished. It still lived in memories, in letters, in the pauses between text messages, but it no longer dictated the rhythm of my life. It was a song I could hum without letting it drown out the new melody I was writing. That night, I slept without dreaming, for the first time in years. That was enough. Story 2. My name is Haley Carter. I'm 28, and just 3 weeks ago, I thought I was about to marry the love of my life. We had been together for 2 solid years. Jordan Miller, a charming, goofy fitness coach with a laugh that could light up a room. He wasn't perfect, but I trusted him. Maybe too much. The last time I saw him, before everything fell apart, he kissed me goodbye and told me he was going camping with his childhood friends. "No service out there, babe," he said, flashing that crooked smile. "I'll see you Sunday." He texted me at 5:02 a.m. the next morning. "We're hitting the road at 8. It read, I didn't think much of it. Fridays were my routine days. I'd go for an early run, take a couple work calls while jogging, then stop by the local coffee shop before heading home. That day started no different. Except it ended with me on my knees, crying in terror, not knowing whether I had just survived a crime or something even more violating. I was halfway through my run, one AirPod in, when I noticed a dark SUV passing me slowly. It felt familiar in a strange way, like something I'd seen before but couldn't place. The vehicle kept circling back every few blocks. My stomach tightened. Maybe it was just paranoia. But I texted my sister Lauren. "Hey, weird SUV following me. Just a heads up. Sharing location." That message may have saved me, because not even 30 seconds later, the car swerved to the curb, a door flung open, and a masked figure lunged at me. I screamed. I kicked. I bit someone's arm. I dropped my phone. I was dragged into the back seat, my legs pinned under a heavy weight, arms yanked behind me, someone laughing in a disturbingly amused tone. Then everything went black. They'd pulled a ski mask over my head. I couldn't see, but I could hear them. They were laughing, teasing. One of them whispered in a low, fake growl, "You're not getting out of this, sweetheart." Another one giggled like it was some frat party gone wrong. And through all that chaos, my brain was shutting down in terror. I peed myself. I didn't even realize it until later. My body had gone into primal survival mode, and my thoughts splintered into panic. Who were these men? Was I being assaulted, murdered, sold? Every horrible headline I'd ever scrolled past became a possibility. And still they laughed. When the car came to a stop, I was yanked out and practically carried into a house. My screams for help were muffled by the mask and the shaking in my chest. I don't remember how long it took before the mask came off, but when it did, I was kneeling on the floor of Jordan's entryway, shaking, drenched in sweat and urine, crying uncontrollably, and in front of me stood Jordan, dressed in a blazer and slacks, holding a bouquet of roses. Behind him, rose petals, fairy lights, and a huge banner that said, "Will you marry me?" He looked horrified. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted at his friends. He wasn't in on it, or at least not the way it unfolded. But it didn't matter, because I wasn't processing anything. My body collapsed. My lungs stopped working right. I was hyperventilating, unable to form a single word. I remember crawling backward, slamming into the front door, still sobbing as he reached for me. That's when the second panic attack hit, this one more violent. My body curled in on itself. I couldn't breathe properly. I heard Jordan calling my name, but his voice sounded like it was underwater. I think it took almost 10 minutes before he helped me to the stairs and whispered that I could go clean up. I didn't want him near me. I couldn't stand anyone near me, so I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom, peeled off my soiled clothes, and stood under the scalding water, shivering even though it was hot. Outside, I heard yelling, more commotion, doors slamming, male voices arguing. But all I could focus on was the stinging in my throat and the realization that something inside me had shifted possibly forever. As I sat on the bed later, wrapped in a towel, I picked up my shattered phone. The screen was cracked, but Lauren had been calling nonstop. I finally answered. The second she heard my voice, she said, "I'm on my way, 90 minutes out," but she said she'd drive faster. I told her everything I could between sobs, and she said only one thing that stuck with me, Haley. "This wasn't a prank. This was assault. Don't let them gaslight you into thinking otherwise. And for the first time that day, something in me snapped awake. When Lauren finally arrived, I was sitting motionless in the corner of Jordan's room, still wrapped in the same towel, unable to change into the fresh clothes he'd laid out. The moment she stepped into the room, I broke. No words, just sobs. She knelt beside me, held my shaking body, and whispered the one thing I didn't know I needed to hear. "You're safe now." That was the first time I felt anything close to real safety since the ordeal began. She helped me dress and pack my things. Jordan tried to talk, hovering just outside the door, but Lauren shut him down with a single look. "Now's not the time," she said coldly, and led me out. The ride back to my apartment was mostly quiet, interrupted only by my breath hitching or Lauren muttering curses under her breath. "This wasn't just a bad joke," she finally said, her grip tightening on the wheel. "What they did, they kidnapped you. That's illegal. That's traumatic. Don't let anyone minimize it." I stared out the window, trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to find the moment when a harmless plan turned into a waking nightmare. I kept replaying it in my head, how one guy's hands had lingered on my thighs, how another's laugh had twisted into something dark, how I'd felt like prey in a horror movie I didn't audition for. Nothing made it okay. The next day, I filed a police report. The officer taking my statement was calm, professional, and to my surprise, furious. "This is false imprisonment," he said firmly. "It doesn't matter what their intentions were. What matters is what you experienced." I felt a knot loosen in my chest. Someone believed me. They didn't ask if I'd overreacted. They didn't make excuses. The driver, Jordan's childhood best friend, came forward voluntarily. He gave his statement, eyes swollen from crying, saying the plan had changed without his approval. He'd only wanted to be part of a silly prank, not whatever the other two had escalated it into. The others, Jason and Eric, were newer friends Jordan had met through a local gym. They were the ones who'd turned the funny kidnapping into something far more sinister. And suddenly, the lines began to blur. What was originally meant to be a surprise proposal had become something else entirely. The original plan, according to the police, involved the SUV pulling up, the guys jumping out in goofy outfits with a fake letter like something out of a ridiculous YouTube stunt. But somewhere between the idea and execution, things went off the rails. Jason and Eric thought it would be more realistic if I were truly scared. They thought it'd be fun if they made me beg, scream, panic. They thought my trauma would be entertaining. The driver tried to pull back. He said so in his statement, but he didn't stop the car. He didn't speak up loudly enough, and that silence made him complicit. Meanwhile, Jordan was devastated. He called. He texted. He begged Lauren to let him talk to me. But I needed space, needed to understand how this man I loved, who knew my trauma history, had somehow surrounded himself with people capable of this. How had he not seen this coming? How had he not vetted them better? And why hadn't he warned me, even vaguely, that something unusual might happen that day? A few days later, after endless tears and no sleep, I agreed to meet him for dinner, public place, Lauren nearby. Jordan looked broken. His face, once so familiar, seemed like a stranger's now. He didn't try to justify anything. He admitted he'd only wanted to surprise me. He admitted he didn't fully know Jason and Eric, and had trusted the driver to handle it. "I didn't know they were going to do that," he whispered, eyes filled with guilt. I believed him, but belief didn't erase the memories etched into my body. I told him I wasn't ready to forgive. Maybe I never would be. But I needed answers, closure, clarity. He promised to cut ties with both men and cooperate fully with police. The conversation ended with him asking one thing: "Do you still love me?" My throat tightened, my chest constricted, and I looked away. Love, in that moment, felt like a broken thing, something I wasn't sure could ever be rebuilt. And yet, deep inside me, I wasn't ready to walk away. Not completely. But if I stayed, it would come at a cost. A cost I was only beginning to understand. For the next few weeks, I became a stranger in my own skin. Every loud engine outside made me flinch. Every unexpected knock at the door sent a jolt through my chest. I couldn't go for a jog without scanning every passing car. What once felt like harmless routines now triggered waves of fear. My therapist called it acute stress response, but to me, it felt like I'd been cracked open raw, exposed, and haunted. Jordan tried to be there, but I kept pulling away. How could I feel safe with him again, when it was his world that opened the door to this trauma? Despite my distance, he didn't give up. He sent notes, flowers, even voice memos of him reading my favorite books. He was trying, genuinely, and somewhere beneath the layers of hurt, I still loved him. We started seeing a couples therapist, an older woman named Valerie, with piercing eyes and a disarming calm. In our first session, she asked a question that cut deeper than expected. Do you feel safe in his presence? Or just in his absence? I didn't have an answer then. I wasn't sure I do now. As the legal side pressed on, I learned more about Jason and Eric. Jason had a minor record for disorderly conduct, nothing violent, but a warning sign I wished Jordan had noticed. Eric, on the other hand, was quieter, almost invisible in the background. His lawyer later disclosed he was on the spectrum, and though that didn't excuse his behavior, it framed some of his lack of emotional awareness. Still, the caresses, the groping, those were choices, not misunderstandings. My lawyer suggested pursuing civil charges. Part of me wanted justice. Another part was exhausted just trying to feel normal again. Jordan never pushed either way. Whatever you need to heal, he kept saying. But healing was elusive, slippery, and inconsistent. One night, almost 2 months after it happened, Jordan surprised me with a quiet dinner in his backyard. String lights, soft music, just the two of us. He got down on one knee, tears in his eyes, and asked me to marry him not as a dramatic gesture, but as a promise to rebuild everything that had broken. I said yes, not because everything was fixed, but because in that moment, I saw the man I'd fallen for, not the chaos that surrounded him. We didn't post anything online, no grand announcements, just a quiet decision between two people desperate for something steady. But steady didn't come easily. I had nightmares, flashbacks, sudden breakdowns in the middle of grocery stores. Jordan was patient, but I could see the toll it took. Some nights, I caught him staring into space, jaw clenched, replaying the incident from his own tortured perspective. He blamed himself more than anyone. And maybe that was the hardest part, seeing the man I love carry the guilt of a trauma he didn't physically inflict, but undoubtedly set in motion. Meanwhile, Lauren was skeptical. You're moving too fast, she warned. Just because someone's sorry doesn't mean they're safe. I knew she was right in some ways. She'd dropped everything to protect me that day. And now I was asking her to believe in a future with the man whose friends traumatized me. She tried to be supportive, but I could feel the hesitation in her voice, like she was waiting for another shoe to drop. And maybe she wasn't wrong, because a few weeks after the proposal, we bumped into Eric at a local coffee shop. He froze. I froze. Jordan stepped between us like a reflex. But I didn't need him to. I held my ground, looked Eric in the eye, and said nothing. He lowered his gaze, muttered an apology, and left. My hands were shaking, but my heart didn't race this time. For the first time since it all began, I felt a flicker of power return to me. That night, I sat with Jordan under the string lights again. I told him I needed to slow down, maybe even take a step back. Not because I didn't love him, but because I wasn't whole yet. I needed to know who I was outside of this trauma, outside of him. He nodded slowly, tears silently falling down his cheeks. "Whatever you need," he whispered again. And that was the last night I stayed at his house. Time passed, but not like water, it moved like honey. Thick and slow, clinging to everything it touched. The space I carved for myself after leaving Jordan wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. I needed to relearn how to be alone without feeling lonely, to rebuild trust in myself before I could offer it to anyone else. Therapy became my compass. I dove deeper into trauma work, unpacking not only what happened during the incident, but everything that had led me to a place where I ignored red flags in favor of love. That journey was painful, filled with self-blame and quiet reckonings. But with each session, each journal entry, each step I took alone in the world, I felt a little less like a victim and a little more like someone reclaiming her life. Jordan and I stayed in touch at first through brief, polite messages, then silence, then the occasional update through mutual friends. I heard he was doing okay, throwing himself into work, attending therapy on his own, and keeping a low profile. Part of me wished we could have met again on different terms, as different people. But that's the thing about trauma. It doesn't just burn the house down, it changes the foundation. Some structures can't be rebuilt, even with love. Legally, the case took on a strange inertia. I decided not to press criminal charges. The idea of reliving every second on a witness stand, of letting strangers pick apart my trauma in a courtroom, made my stomach turn. But I did meet with a civil attorney, and while I didn't move forward with a lawsuit, I filed official statements. That was enough for me to have my truth documented. Even if no courtroom heard it, the men involved faced their own fallout. Jason was evicted by his girlfriend, lost his internship, and eventually moved out of state. Eric withdrew from school. I don't know what happened to him afterward. I didn't want to know. Closure wasn't about watching them suffer. It was about no longer letting their shadows darken my door. By summer, something strange happened. I laughed without flinching. I jogged again, this time through different routes, listening to full playlists instead of splitting my focus out of fear. I met new people, joined a book club, adopted a senior dog named Bella, who snores like a truck but has the gentlest eyes I've ever seen. She became my emotional support without trying, grounding me in a present that finally started to feel safe again. Lauren remained my rock. She never once said "I told you so." Instead, she made space for my healing quiet nights watching reruns, spontaneous weekend trips, long walks where neither of us had to say much. In the silences, I rediscovered the kind of love that doesn't demand explanations or apologies, the kind that waits, no matter how long it takes. Looking back now, I realize that what happened to me was more than just a horrific prank gone wrong. It was a rupture, a forced awakening that revealed not just how fragile safety is, but how powerful survival can be. I'll never fully erase that day. I still tense up around SUVs. I still double-check my locks. But I'm no longer frozen. I'm not defined by fear. And I refuse to be marked only by what broke me. This story doesn't end with revenge, or even with perfect justice. It ends with me, standing firmly in a life I built brick by brick. I don't regret leaving Jordan, even though part of me will always care for the version of us that existed before everything fell apart. I've learned that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about choosing, every day, to move forward anyway. And so, this chapter closes not with a bang, not with some grand conclusion, but with quiet resilience. I'm still here, I'm still healing, and for the first time in a long time. That's enough. Story 3. My name is Claire Thompson. I'm 45 years old, a restoration specialist who deals with antique heirlooms and vintage decor. I've spent most of my life in Portland, Oregon, a city that prides itself on its character, its creative energy, and its deep love of the past 3 things I've always held close to my heart. My best friend, Lauren Mitchell, 43, has been by my side since high school. She was the maid of honor at my wedding, the first to visit after my daughter Emma was born, and the kind of person who never forgets a birthday. We've been through decades of life together: love, heartbreak, career changes, the messy in-betweens. That's why what happened with the lamp shook me to my core. The lamp in question isn't just a lamp. It's an antique crystal heirloom passed down from my grandmother. It's delicately cut, etched with fine floral patterns, and glows with a soft amber hue when lit. As a child, I would sit at my grandmother's knee, reading picture books by the glow of that lamp. After she passed, the lamp came to me, and with it, all the weight of memory. So, when my husband Rick and I were offered a 3-year opportunity abroad in Belgium, and we had to downsize drastically, selling our house and putting most of our life into storage, the only item I couldn't bear to cram into a dark, metal unit was that lamp. Lauren, ever eager to help, offered without hesitation. "It'll look stunning in my living room," she said. "And when you're back, it's all yours." I was relieved, grateful. She lived in a charming mid-century home and had a reputation for maintaining things beautifully. I trusted her completely. I didn't think to write anything down or take a formal photo. It didn't even cross my mind this was Lauren. She was practically family, the kind of person you don't question. Or at least, that's what I thought back then. Our time in Europe was a whirlwind full of adventure. New friendships, art galleries, and long dinners. But I always carried with me the thought of coming home, to rebuild what we had. When we returned last spring, everything moved quickly. We bought a smaller house back in Portland, a fixer-upper with personality and space for new memories. We picked up our things from storage, reassembled our life piece by piece, and then finally settled. I texted Lauren, "Hey, can I swing by this week to pick up the lamp?" That's when the world tilted. Her reply was instant but cold. I thought we agreed it was a gift. My heart dropped. I stared at the screen, rereading it over and over, searching for the joke. But there was no LOL, no winking emoji, just flat denial. I called her, confused. "Lauren, that lamp is a family heirloom. I asked you to hold it, not keep it." Her tone shifted, defensive. "Claire, that's not how I remember it. You said you had no space and that it would be better with me. I didn't think you wanted it back." I was stunned into silence. "That lamp belonged to my grandmother," I said finally. "You knew that." She didn't respond right away. Then came the emotional grenade. "If you're going to put a thing above our friendship, maybe we need to rethink what this friendship is." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I lay in bed, trying to reconcile decades of friendship with the woman who now threatened to end it over a lamp. Emma, my daughter, came into my room that morning, finding me still in yesterday's clothes. "What happened?" she asked, concerned. When I explained, her face hardened. "She's stealing from you," she said bluntly. "You wouldn't let a stranger get away with that. Why let her?" It hit me then. This wasn't just about a lamp. It was about the ease with which someone I loved rewrote reality to suit her comfort. And it forced me to ask myself a question I'd been avoiding. How long had this dynamic been quietly toxic? As I replayed the past in my mind, more memories surfaced. Little moments I'd brushed off the time Lauren took credit for a design tip I gave her. How she forgot to pay me back for a shared gift. Or dismissed my milestones with lukewarm praise. These were not isolated incidents. They were patterns. And now, with this lamp, the most sentimental object I owned, she was drawing a line in the sand, forcing me to choose peace or principle. I spent the next few days caught in a fog of disbelief and quiet dread. I kept replaying our conversation, searching for a moment, any moment, where I might have unintentionally implied the lamp was hers. But I knew I hadn't. I'd been clear. And yet, Lauren had twisted the memory into something more convenient for her. It felt like trying to argue with a wall that refused to admit it even existed. I tried to stay calm. Rational, I told myself. This is a misunderstanding. We've been friends too long for this to be anything else. But deep down, something darker gnawed at me, something that said this wasn't confusion. It was entitlement. Emma was furious. "She's gaslighting you." "Mom," she said as we sat in the kitchen one evening, "you trusted her. And now she's acting like you're crazy for remembering things differently. That's not a friend. That's a manipulator." Rick was more reserved, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "You've known her a long time," he said gently. "But maybe it's time to accept she's changed." I nodded. Even though my heart refused to keep pace, I didn't want to believe Lauren could be this cold. Not her. Not the girl who once held my hand after my miscarriage. Who brought soup when Emma had the flu. Who cried with me when my mom died. But here we were. I texted Lauren again. "Hey, I'm not trying to fight. I just want the lamp back. It means a lot to my family. Let's talk this out." Her reply came 2 days later. "I'm too busy this week. I'll let you know when I have time." No apology, no acknowledgement of the tension. Just a brush off. Like I was the one being unreasonable. It wasn't until the third message went unanswered that I began to feel the shift inside me. That subtle yet irreversible flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel, yet betrayal. Then came the accidental discovery that sealed everything. Karen, an old mutual friend from high school who'd moved back to town recently, invited me to brunch. As we caught up over coffee, she mentioned visiting Lauren's house a few weeks prior. Oh, and she showed me this stunning lamp, some kind of antique crystal piece. She said you gave it to her as a farewell gift when you moved abroad. Said it was symbolic, like passing on a legacy. I froze mid-sip. My stomach twisted. She said I gave it to her. Karen blinked, sensing the shift. Yeah. Was that not true? I shook my head slowly, trying to swallow the rising wave of nausea. No, it wasn't. I drove home in silence, rage simmering beneath my skin. This wasn't confusion. This was a performance, a carefully constructed story she'd told more than once. Lauren hadn't just kept the lamp, she'd rewritten the narrative, shared it publicly, and painted herself as the gracious recipient of a sentimental heirloom. And suddenly, I saw it all for what it was, a long game of aesthetic possession. She loved how the lamp looked in her house. It gave her story, depth, a heritage she could parade around as if it were her own. She didn't want the lamp because it meant something to her. She wanted it because it meant something to me. The next morning, I called her again. No answer. So I left a voicemail. Calm, firm. "Lauren, this isn't a debate. That lamp belonged to my grandmother. And you promised to keep it safe. I need it back. This week." A few hours later, she texted, "I'm really hurt. Claire, I can't believe you'd accuse me of lying. I've cherished that lamp for years. If you're going to reduce our friendship to something, maybe we're not the friends I thought we were." I stared at the screen, stunned. The audacity wasn't just shocking, it was heartbreaking. She'd weaponized the idea of friendship, of loyalty, and turned it into a shield against accountability. I spoke to a lawyer friend that evening, just to understand my options. Brianna, sharp and blunt, told me the truth. If you can prove ownership, photos, appraisals, history, it's yours. This isn't a criminal case, but small claims is viable if she refuses to return it. You have grounds. That word ownership echoed in my mind, because this wasn't just about the lamp anymore. It was about reclaiming something I'd lost long before Europe, my ability to say no, to set a boundary, to stand up to people who thought love gave them permission to cross lines. I didn't want to go to court. I didn't want headlines. I didn't even want revenge. I just wanted my grandmother's lamp back, and the quiet peace that came with it. But I was starting to understand that if I wanted resolution, I'd have to be the one to light the match. The next few days felt like walking through emotional quicksand. I was trying to function, make dinner, return emails, help Emma finalize her financial aid paperwork. But part of me was constantly swirling with questions I couldn't shake. How could Lauren lie so effortlessly? Had she rehearsed that story? Did she ever actually value our friendship? Or was it always a performance wrapped in convenience and pretty words? I started digging through old photos. Rick helped me sift through digital archives, and by some miracle, I found one Christmas Eve, 5 years ago, in our old living room. The lamp sat right there on the end table, a plate of cookies next to it, Emma's tiny hand reaching for one. Another photo showed the lamp in my grandmother's house, positioned exactly where I remembered it by the fireplace. Proof, in time-stamped pixels, that this heirloom had always lived in our family. I emailed the images to myself, backed them up to the cloud, and printed hard copies just in case. For the first time since this mess began, I felt a quiet sense of control returning. Meanwhile, Emma took matters into her own hands. I didn't know until later, but she had posted in a local community forum asking if anyone had seen the lamp at Lauren's house during parties or events. The response was eye-opening. A woman named Miss DeWitt, Lauren's elderly neighbor, commented that she remembered the lamp vividly. Lauren always said it was her best friend's gift. She wrote, she was so proud of it, said it had a great story behind it. A story. That word hit like a slap. Lauren hadn't just kept the lamp. She had been performing ownership for years, telling tales at book club, social gatherings, probably even online. That realization didn't break my heart. It burned it. I decided I wasn't going to wait anymore. Early Saturday morning, I drove to her house with a calm that startled even me. I wasn't there to argue. I wasn't there to beg. I was there to retrieve what was mine. I had the printed photos in my tote bag and a bottle of French wine we'd brought back from abroad, her favorite label. I figured if nothing else, I'd leave her with a parting gesture of grace. When she opened the door, her expression said everything she knew why I was there. "Claire," she began, too brightly, "what a surprise." "I think we both know it isn't," I said quietly. "I'm here for the lamp." Her face dropped. "You're really doing this over a piece of glass?" "It's not just glass, Lauren. It's my grandmother, my childhood, my family's memory." She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped when I reached into my bag and gently handed her the wine. "I brought this for you, to thank you for taking care of the lamp, but now I need to take it home." I spoke with calm finality, not anger, if there was ever any misunderstanding. "I hope you see now how important it is to me. I need to take it back." She blinked rapidly, clearly thrown by the wine, by my tone, by the lack of a fight. For a moment, I saw her soften, and then something flickered behind her eyes. Pride, or fear of looking bad, or both. "Fine," she snapped, turning sharply and unplugging the lamp from its usual spot. "Take it, but don't expect things to go back to normal." I nodded. I carried the lamp to my car with trembling hands. It wasn't heavy, but it held the full weight of a friendship I was finally willing to let go. When I set it in the passenger seat, I sat there for a long time, staring at it. My pulse slowed, My breath evened, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was sad, deeply, painfully sad. But underneath the grief was something firmer, quieter, stronger peace. That afternoon, I told Emma and Rick everything. We placed the lamp on the mantel of our new living room, where the light hit it just right. Emma knelt to look at it, her fingers gently tracing the base. "I remember this," she whispered. "I used to fall asleep on the couch with it on. It always felt safe." I smiled. That's because it was. But the peace didn't last long. 2 days later, I received a text from another mutual friend. "Hey, I just heard about the lamp situation. Lauren's telling people you manipulated her into giving it back, that you showed up with wine to guilt her and twisted the whole story." I stared at the message, heat rising to my face. Of course she would flip the narrative. Of course. The lamp wasn't enough, now she wanted to salvage her image, even if it meant painting me as the villain. I didn't respond to the gossip. I didn't post rebuttals or screenshots. But inside me, something began to shift again. Maybe I hadn't wanted revenge before. Maybe I had hoped to leave with my head high and my heart intact. But now I wasn't so sure. I didn't respond to the rumors Lauren was spreading. At least, not at first. I told myself silence was strength, that I didn't need to validate lies with rebuttals. But there's something insidious about half-truths told by someone you once trusted with your whole heart. They fester in the mouths of others, mutate, evolve. A week after I'd retrieved the lamp, I started noticing subtle changes. Friends who usually texted every few days went quiet. A few stopped liking my social posts. I ran into one acquaintance at the farmer's market who offered an awkward smile, then quickly looked away. It was small, but I felt it, the shift. I wouldn't have known how bad it had gotten if it weren't for Karen. She called one afternoon, voice edged with urgency. "Claire, I don't know if you've heard, but Lauren's been telling people you ambushed her, that you manipulated her with wine and guilt trips. She even posted a picture of her living room without the lamp with a caption like, 'Some gifts were never meant to be taken back.'" I closed my eyes. My fingers clenched the edge of the counter. "She's trying to turn everyone against me," I whispered. Karen sighed. "Honestly, she's making herself look worse than you. But you should know some people are buying it." That night, Emma found me scrolling through Lauren's page. Her words were curated perfectly melancholic, vague, noble, a masterclass in performative victimhood. "Mom," Emma said quietly, "you don't have to take this. You have the receipts, the history, the truth." I shook my head. "I'm not going to drag this into a social media war." Emma hesitated, then said, "But what if you told your side differently?" That's how the idea for the article came to life. I'd never considered writing publicly about something so personal, but Emma helped me see the power in it. I didn't name names. I didn't accuse. Instead, I wrote a piece called "When Heirlooms Become Hostages: The Quiet Grief of Losing Trust," and submitted it to a local lifestyle blog. It was raw and reflective about legacy, memory, and what it means when a friend weaponizes sentimentality. Within a day, the post had over 1,000 shares. Comments flooded in, people telling their own stories of betrayal, manipulation, and the impossible grief of watching a long-standing friendship crumble over something seemingly small. My experience wasn't unique, and that realization broke me open in a way nothing else had. Then something unexpected happened. Brianna, Emma's friend and a newly minted lawyer, texted me a screenshot. "Thought you'd like to see this." It was a post on a community forum. Ms. DeWitt, Lauren's neighbor, had weighed in. I remember Claire giving Lauren that lamp to hold, not to keep. Lauren showed it off to everyone and claimed it had been in Claire's family for generations. Said she was lucky to have a friend who trusted her with something so special. Beneath it, Others began chiming in, sharing their own recollections of Lauren's shifting stories. The tide was turning. Not because I had forced it, but because truth has a way of finding oxygen. Lauren, of course, saw the article. I knew she had when I received an email short. Clipped. If your goal was to humiliate me publicly, congratulations, I hope your lamp is worth it. No signature, no warmth, just one last attempt to wound. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I'd spent too long trying to preserve a friendship that had been rotting from the inside. But the closure didn't feel triumphant. It felt sobering, like walking through the ashes of something you once built and realizing the foundation had cracked years before. I thought back to all the moments I'd excused, overlooked, forgiven. The subtle digs at my work, the way she downplayed my wins, how she never asked how I really was, but always had time to talk about herself. The lamp hadn't caused the end. It had simply exposed the truth. We hosted a small dinner that weekend. Emma, Rick, a few real friends, people who'd stood by me, who never doubted the story, who never needed screenshots to know I was telling the truth. We sat under dim lights with the lamp glowing quietly behind us, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed freely. Not the brittle kind, the real kind. Emma raised her glass and toasted to letting go of what hurts and reclaiming what matters. I clinked mine against hers and nodded. I didn't just get my heirloom back, I got myself back too. But even as I celebrated, a quiet unease lingered, not about Lauren, but about what this said about trust, memory, and the thin line between generosity and exploitation. Because sometimes, the people who smile the widest are the ones holding knives behind their backs. Weeks passed. The lamp remained exactly where I'd placed it on the mantel, bathed in warm afternoon light. Sometimes I'd catch myself pausing as I passed it, fingers brushing the edge of the glass, like greeting an old friend who'd just returned from war. But what struck me most wasn't the object itself. It was how much had changed in me since that afternoon I retrieved it. I hadn't just brought home a family heirloom. I had brought home boundaries. I had brought home truth. Lauren never reached out again. A few mutual friends checked in, not with judgment, but cautious curiosity. I could feel the quiet recalibrations in our social circles, lines being redrawn, loyalties shifting, some people fading gently into the periphery. I let them. I was done defending my right to be treated with respect. I no longer needed everyone to understand. I needed peace. And for the first time in a long time, I had it. But healing isn't a linear path. Some nights I still found myself spiraling through old memories. A birthday party in our 20s, a summer camping trip where she burned the marshmallows and blamed the wind, our long teenage phone calls, dreaming about future husbands and old houses filled with vintage charm. She was woven into the fabric of my history, and untangling her left gaps I didn't know how to mend. But maybe not every wound needs stitching. Maybe some are meant to remain open, a quiet reminder of who we were and who we chose to become. Emma noticed the change in me before I did. One evening, while we were sorting through a box of old decorations, she paused and said, "You seem lighter, like something let go." I smiled, surprised by how accurate it felt. I think I stopped trying to fix something that was never mine to fix. She nodded, then added softly, "I'm proud of you," and somehow, that meant more than anything. Rick suggested we take a short trip, just the two of us, somewhere quiet. We ended up driving down the Oregon coast, stopping at antique shops and sleepy seaside diners. At one shop, tucked between a row of dusty oil paintings, I found a tiny brass frame, delicately engraved, I placed a picture of my grandmother inside it, then set it beside the lamp when we got home. A full circle, a quiet tribute, a reminder that some connections outlast betrayal. In the weeks that followed, I found myself opening up more, reconnecting with old friends I'd lost touch with, starting a local book club, even taking on a new restoration project at the Historical Society. Not because I needed to fill a void, but because I had room again, emotional room, and that space brought clarity. It reminded me that my worth wasn't defined by how long I could hold on to toxic relationships, but by how bravely I could let them go. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from Karen. She'd read my piece again and felt compelled to share her own story of a friend who once took more than she gave. Your words helped me realize I was holding on to someone who no longer existed. She wrote, "Thank you for showing me I'm not alone." I held the letter to my chest for a moment. That's when I realized the true impact of telling my story. It wasn't just cathartic, it was connective. In naming my pain, I had validated someone else's. And that, perhaps, was the final gift in all this. Not the lamp, not the silent triumph of taking back what was mine, but the way a wound, when shared with honesty, could become a bridge, a thread between women who had been dismissed, gaslit, manipulated. We were not bitter. We were not petty. We were just done being quiet. Now, when I look at that lamp, I don't just see my grandmother's living room. I see the full arc of this journey, the trust, the break, the reclaiming. I see the reflection of a woman who finally learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you lock when someone keeps barging in. I see the glow of something more than nostalgia. I see survival and peace and maybe a little wisdom. Because some friendships don't die. They fade, and others you set down gently like an heirloom in the wrong hands, and one day, if you're brave enough, you take them back.